there. All right. So watercolor. Yes, I'm playing with watercolor. I'm kind of being a student of watercolor here. I've just opened up the Art Philosophy Complexion set, and I'm putting all the swatches out on the little swatch card that comes with it because number one, I've never worked with it, so I really need to know what the colors are. And number two, I have never painted a portrait or a face in watercolor ever before. So this is a first. I'm sharing it with you. Good, bad, or the ugly. We're going to see what happens here. So I am filling out the card, but just to let you know, what I did off camera is I used my projector and I projected onto a piece of watercolor paper. This is like a 9 by 12 piece of watercolor paper I will be using, but I used my Stabilo Marxol, my red water-soluble Stabilo Marxol pencil, because I was thinking maybe this will lend to skin tone. I didn't want to use black. I didn't want to use brown. I used this red, and we're going to see what happens. And I'm not going to lie, I love it. So as I finish up the card, the next thing you're going to see is that I've got pink, because there is this pink watercolor on my brush, and I'm kind of dissolving the red pencil. So that's why it looks super pink, because of that red Marxol, which is kind of fun. Like, I'm really glad I did the red pencil, and I'm really glad I didn't choose a darker color. And I kind of love the pink, but I really wanted to use all the colors in the palette. So it is an interesting kind of spin on things, not gonna lie. Really thought it was cool, but I really wanted not to look like a pink alien. So I'm gonna start adding in some more different colors in there. And I know, here's the thing, I'm not a watercolorist. And the thing I know about watercolors, you're supposed to leave your whites white, and you have to work light to dark. It's literally like learning how to ride a bicycle for me. So I'm struggling. So those of you that are watching this and you're like, I'm a seasoned watercolor artist and you're doing it wrong, I'm sure I am. But I don't think it's about right or wrong. I really do think it's about having fun, and I'm playing and experimenting, and I want to share that with you because I do not believe that there is only one right way to do anything in art. It's about exploration and finding how it fits in your hand. And that was my reason for wanting to dive into watercolor. I talked last time we did the little watercolor thing that I took a watercolor class by really a horrible woman who basically kicked me out because I wasn't doing it the way she wanted me to. And I just kind of soured on watercolor, and I really want not to let that impede my experimentation anymore, because I think I sat with that icky moment for way too long, and I want to play with multimedia, playing with how it works in my hand. Maybe I need to experiment with brushes. I'm really pissed off that watercolor brushes cost as much as a nice pair of boots. But for right now, what I've got is working fine. And I also believe in the art of destruction. I've talked about this before. Those of you that are listening to this might have taken my art of destruction workshop. There is something beautiful in the not perfect, the art of destroying, the art of making something wonky on purpose, the art of making it clumsy and making it painterly and making it disjointed and irregular, that Picasso-esque style of putting something in the wrong place because you can kind of thing. And that's what I'm really kind of enjoying about watercolor, because look at that. That's not pretty. I kind of love the beauty in the broken, the beauty in the disturbing, and this is kind of a new freedom I'm finding in this water-based media. What I don't love about watercolor is in order to layer, you have to wait for the layers to dry, and you've got to wait for water to dry. And that's just, I just don't know how to do that yet. And I know watercolor is a layering type thing. Because you can say, Donna, you use oil, and oil takes forever to dry, but I don't layer near like I would even in acrylic, let alone in watercolor. So it is like trying to learn to ride a bicycle for me. But that said, I'm really digging the really cool bicycle I'm on. So does that make sense? And I'm using these art philosophy palettes, which I think make it really easy for color choosing. Like, you can walk into a store and see the wall of watercolor and have to pick a tube or whatever. But the palettes actually make it that these all go together. This is the series I'm working in. I don't need anything else. Now, sure, I could bring other things in, but I like the simplicity. Why make it more difficult than it needs to be when you're learning? So if you like to paint portraits, figures, people, this is like the most stupid, simple way to start. I mean, it's like already done for you. This is all you need. Enjoy your stay. Anyway, so I am just layering. I'm playing. Like, I hope nobody watching this is under the impression I'm like, and then you do this, and then you do that, and I'm the foremost authority. And then I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just doing it. And that's half the battle, isn't it? Like, just do it. Who the freak cares? Just make something ugly. And I'm gonna be honest with you. This turns out spectacular in my opinion. I love this. Like, I love it so much that I was doing the editing of the video, and it was laying on my ottoman here, and my son walked down and he was like, "That's spectacular. When did you do that?" I was like, I just whipped that right out of my ass a few minutes ago. Yeah, yeah. Enough with that, because right now I'm on a little excited little rant and I need to just talk about the video here. So, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about here value, darks and lights. Here's where I'm struggling, because I want to go in with darks and make it lighter, and that's the opposite of what you're supposed to do with watercolor. So I'm trying to work light and build up. But again, at first we must crawl before we can run. I know this is probably weird too, but I love like sorrowful, suggestive, emotional figures. I very seldomly make happy skipping through the tulips type of figures. I don't know why. I think if I did, I wouldn't like it. And I don't really try to make them sad, but they're never, tiptoeing through the tulips kind of happy. I like them a little bit disturbed. I do. I like a little Disturbia. And there's no good reason why. I just do. I like to play with the eyes, the sag, the bags under the eyes. And I'm moving around this palette, right? Because when I'm looking at the palette, I'm noticing there's a lot of yellows. And I don't want this to be super yellow, but I so need it not to be pink. So I'm playing around with it. I do like the dark colors. It's interesting too, as I'm playing with the watercolor, they so dry differently. Like, you do have to keep layering. Here I'm going in with the darks because it's my thing. I love value. So I'm making the darks maybe too dark, and I'm just moving around. Here's the other thing. I really like the staining. It's probably a real word for it, but I just like how watercolor stains. And I want to do that too. I don't want to paint this. Like, I don't want to have acrylic and have like, and this is the nose brush marks. I want this puddling and this staining and this destruction is probably the best way I can say it, but it's beautiful destruction. I don't want it to sound like it's destruction, like I want to destroy the piece. I want it to sound like it's destruction, like it's just not perfect. There is no expectation on perfection. So back in the olden days, like I'm 150 years old, but back when Inspiration Wednesday started and art journaling became more of a practice in my life, I was coming into my own as an artist. And one of the things I had to keep telling myself was, you're perfect just the way you create. It was something kind of like a mantra. And every time I said it, it kind of gave me permission to stay loose, to stay experimental, to the point that even my children would say it to me, say it to themselves, and then it became part of my logo early on. I think I'm back to that. Like, I'm back to this point where I can say again, you're perfect just the way you create. There shouldn't be maybe any expectation, this experimenting, this trying new product, this doing something you've never done before and sharing it with you is about opening the conversation. I want this to encourage you. I want this to start a conversation between you and I, between you and your art, between you and your product, in your space. I want to encourage you to say, you're perfect just the way you create. even when you don't know what you're doing. I think this sense of community, this sense of this bigger notion of art is something we can all share, whether it's working in watercolor, uh, for the first time, painting a portrait in watercolor, figuring out where my hand, the brush, the media combine, figuring out how I can be expressive as an artist and still learn and share without the fear of feeling like I shouldn't share this because maybe it's not good enough. I feel like the rawness in the share is where the magic happens. That's where the conversation happens. That's where we connect. Connecting those creative dots through I don't even uncomfortableness, you know, um maybe I make the wrong brush mark. Maybe I do something silly. Maybe you're cringing. Maybe you love this. I mean, there's all that kind of vulnerability in creative practice when you share it in its rawest terms or forms. And I think um, in sharing these types of things with you, I look for your feedback. And I hope it starts a conversation between you and I that maybe you want to try painting a portrait. You've never done it before. You want to try watercolor. Maybe you only do watercolor and you're going to try using colored pencils. I mean, there's just so many things. Maybe the idea of the red Stabilo wasn't something avant-garde and it was something that you do all the time because that's normally what you should be using. I mean, those conversations, those shares, those aha moments, those things that, no one in your household kind of gets, but then you hold up a red Stabilo and start sketching a face and turning it into watercolor, and your art creative buddies are like, hell yeah. Because I feel like, sometimes as creatives, we are living in this kind of vacuum where art isn't happening and getting initial feedback. And so I'm hoping that the more I share these with you, the more you want to have a part in the conversation, the more you want to join the community, the more you want to have this kind of stuff in your life. I want you to be a part of my everyday conversation so we can share in this. Oh, okay. So here's this moment. Hey, you could use a baby wipe and take away watercolor. Just note to self, if you're not a regular watercolor artist, you can actually remove the paper. Just saying. But yeah, that's where I'm like, oh my God, I know that I don't have white, and I know they make white watercolor, but I know I don't have white watercolor, and I'm supposed to use the space that's there. But a baby wipe is still my friend. Some things do not change. And I'm happy that they don't because I wanted to retreat from adding so much watercolor. And I am kind of playing around. There's something that happens around eyes that watercolor kind of gives you that ability to make them teary or forlorn. Um, I even had a moment during this that I was like, maybe I should bring out some blues or purples. And then I was like, no, I was just going to use the simplified palette. You don't need to bring out the kitchen sink, Donna. We're not at kitchen sink. Make it simple. And so I did. I resisted, and I stayed within the palette. I also had this moment where I was like, you know what also be cool? What if I brought in those Creative Color pencils I got not too long ago, or colored pencils, or watercolor pencils, or ink tints? And I did resist it. Now, that said, you know what happens when you're like, what if, what if, what? I could have been like on a tangent. I could have used pencils. I could have dropped ink. Like, there's so many things I could have done. But I thought, for my first portrait, why don't we just keep it simple and stay with the palette like you initially wanted to do? Because if you're like me, and if you, because this was about, I kind of compressed it a little bit because you would have been watching paint dry. This was about an hour and 15 minutes it took me to do in full length video time. Now, that doesn't mean that that's all the time because, I stopped and had lunch and all that kind of stuff. But I could sit here for 6 hours and futz on this and probably have considered that time very well spent and just played. And I probably would have taken out washi tapes and, just going on with that. I know, and some of you are like, Donna, why didn't you do that? I just kind of wanted to see if I could do it. Could I emote with watercolor media? I worked in that little journal for the last one I did, which was fun, but it wasn't a thing. And yes, it's a cool thing, and I like mixed media, but something I really like to do is to paint portraits in oil. Was I able to communicate the same emotion in watercolor? I kind of feel like I was. It was exciting. Like, it was so exciting. And I feel like I learned a lot from this process. Like, I think I probably want to use more water. I also feel like for some reason, she turned into the Twilight Star. I can't think of her name off. Kristen Stewart. There it is. And I wasn't painting Kristen Stewart, but it does look like Kristen Stewart when I'm done. Um, Clearly, I was channeling my inner Twilight, or maybe the new Diana movie, or I don't know. I have to admit, looks like Kristen Stewart. Ish. Of course, if Kristen Stewart is watching this, I'm sorry, I probably didn't do you justice. And if Kristen Stewart is watching this, woohoo for me. Anyway, so background. I do like to leave things white, but I didn't want to because I really wanted to use this black and kind of bring in the forlornness of her eyes. And so I was like, this is fun. Yeah, I totally used it like acrylic paint. I'm sure those watercolor people watching this right now are like, you are painting like a watercolor artist, and you're going to kick me out of your YouTube feed like that bitchy teacher kicked me out of the watercolor class because I was painting like an acrylic painter. But I don't care. I just don't care. Okay, maybe I care a little. It would hurt. It hurt. Um, but I just like the goopiness. Is that a word? Goopy? I just like how it puddles, and I wanted to play with that puddling. And I wanted to also see if I could build up the intensity even in the black. But I was just playing around. And here's the other thing. I really think I do these things so that I can build a painting and I can get to the point where I could take the tape off. Because when I get to the point that I take this tape off, it's a cheap thrill. It really is. I'm like just bracing myself for it. And all these little touches. I just keep touching. This is when you could really screw up a painting. I don't feel like I did, but you can really screw up a painting by all these little futzing touches. Futzing touches. Futzing touches. Um, and I'm working on building up the contrast. So yes, there is dark and yes, there is light, but I want a little bit more of a transition. So the last few minutes of this, I am really just kind of refining around. I know that you're supposed to work in layers. I'm going to try to work in these fun layers. I start bringing that pink back in because I feel like it got a little bit yellow. I really want that to be like a solid pink, and it's watercolor and it's not, but I'm working on it. I bring in the baby wipe. It's just kind of fun to play around. So yeah, I feel like watercolor is now my friend. I could call watercolor my friend now. And for years, it was not my friend. And I thought that people that were able to work in watercolor were magic secret unicorns with the patience of saints. And now I figured out that yes, those people probably are patient and they are probably saints, but there is like a speedy, destructive part of watercolor. Like, I could use this recklessly. Is that not the most exciting thing you've heard all week? You can use watercolor recklessly with wild abandon. And that's what's so fun about it. I didn't know that. Nobody told me. And it's also really much cleaner than acrylic, and cleaner than oil. I am a very clean oil painter, but this is way more cleaner. Is that a way? This is much more clean. Anyway, so I do play around with kind of the forlornness of her eyes, a little bit of a move around, just maybe more depth of shadow. She's really kind of simple, and I want to make her a bit more destroyed, for lack of a better word. I tend to use this word destroyed as a badge of honor. Like, like scribble out an eye. That's exciting. It's like it takes a big set of balls to scribble out an eye on a painting. I didn't do it here. I probably shouldn't be talking about it. But I just, when I'm playing around with the eyes, I'm thinking about and building up my courage to leave like big gobs of wet, gushy paint around. Anybody here? I mean, it just, feel free to comment or not, or just nod your head and I won't know. Um, anybody here use watercolor with like this reckless abandon? I want to be your friend. I want to learn from you. I want to hone in because I feel like it's so freeing. I do. I just feel like I'm so grateful. I am just so grateful that Prima and Art Philosophy sent these to me. They believed in me enough to say, you can do it, which is really all, like just to be seen and heard. Come on, that's like everything. Anyway, I've got about 5 more minutes left on the process of this, and it really is just me kind of touching and moving. I will say there's a couple times I touch and I'm like, I don't like that at all. Baby wipe, come save me. Get that off there. Um, and I know that I can't make the hair super dark because I made the background dark and I don't want it to blend in either. I have no idea what kind of hairstyle I've now created on here. Um, it's like pulled back with strange wisps or not. I don't know. Or maybe it's like a modified pixie mullet. I don't know. I'm working on here again, shadows and lights, as you see, shaping, but I'm working with the push and pull. So dark colors recede and light colors come forward. And as you see me kind of playing and pushing and pulling this back and forth, really loose. I would even say painterly, but can you be painterly in watercolor? Is it just not? It's like saying small shrimp. It's the same thing. Painterly and watercolor is the same thing. But I'm trying. I'm also learning. This is another thing I'm doing wrong. I dip my brush in the water and then dry it off like acrylic. Like you kind of put it in paint and maybe like tap off, or when you wet your brush in acrylic, you kind of take the water out. I have to figure out how to keep my brush soppy and figure out how to move it around the piece sloppily and soppily because that'll give me more of the staining. I don't want this to get too refined. It's real easy to do that. And it's real easy. Like I've been using a drier brush than I probably should. So you see me kind of figuring that out as I move around. I really love the eyes. I do. I just really love those eyes. I kind of love the lips. Not a huge fan of the nose, but it works because, I kind of lost the will to live. And I wanted this to be fast. Ooh, ooh, I love that. That little dark part under the eyes. Oh, I just love that. Kind of feels sad. Kind of feels badass. I'm trying to make like the eyelashes a little darker, the shadow around the color of the eye, which you're going to ask what color it is, and it's just mud. I wanted to add a little bit more warmth into it. Everything kind of got a little cold, like the brown I was using was a little cold, and the pink, even though it's there, it kind of faded in to the background. I started playing safe. I needed to bring some darks back in, and I decided to go with this kind of rusty skin tone. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the exact colors because I took all the little packaging off, but it doesn't really matter. And yeah, just moving around. So it's exciting. I find that this is just exciting. I did that. I was so excited today. I did that. And honestly, for my son to come down and be like, "Oh my God, that's awesome." I mean, really? Do you need anything else in life when your 18-year-old son says that's really cool? I'm trying to bring in the light back on the chin. I think I made it too dark, so I'm just trying to make it glow a little bit. It's a push and pull thing, just dancing around. I'm trying to make the shadow on the neck a little darker. That'll help the chin being lighter look like it's coming more forward and push the neck back. But I'm liking the messy. I really think this would also be cool to just pick a random palette of colors and play around with it too. But that's next. I have so much watercolor that we're gonna have to keep doing this again until you lose the will to live, and then you stop doing it. But again, playing with the push and pull. I kind of played around with this corner of the neck, messed it up about a dozen times before I was like, okay, walk away from the neck, Donna. I just didn't want to feel like it was a weird shaped neck over there, and I just didn't want to feel like it was on like some head on a pedestal. I wanted to curve around, so I was playing with that curve. Again, a dark color back there helps push and pull, but really this whole thing is leading up to the fact that taking the tape off, and it's pure joy when the tape comes off. Are you ready for it? Oh, yes, please. I love it. I love her. I love her. And again, she's like 9 by 12. I just went for it. I love her. I hope you try watercolor. I hope I've kind of just pushed you to take out watercolors, whether you're a watercolor artist or not. I hope you share what you did or what you felt with watercolor after this. And if you like this and you want more from me, I invite you to join me over on my Patreon page where we have tutorials and guided lessons like this and so much more.